In the summer of 1780, amidst the chaos of the American War of Independence, the Battle of Musgrove Mill unfolded here in the backcountry of South Carolina. This very underrated battle tells the story of strategy, great daring do on both sides, and fierce combat. So join me today as we explore the grounds of this fascinating battle, and also as I explore the trail that is on its historic battleground. All right, so let's set the scene. It's summer of 1780. The revolution is in its sixth year. However, it's just kind of starting to heat up in the South. Earlier in 1780, the British captured the city of Charlestown, nowadays known as Charleston, and the fledgling government of South Carolina was forced to surrender as well. So nominally, South Carolina was under British control. However, they needed some help from local loyalists in order to make that control a real thing, in order to actually effectively take control of South Carolina. So they asked local loyalists to seize key points of access that would facilitate the Crown forces bringing this rebellious colony back into submission. So where I am today was actually the site of a grist mill and a river crossing, a ford as they were known. And it was owned by Edward Musgrove, who was neutral, just wanted to mind his own business. But the loyalists pounced on this here because it was really important for armies to be able to cross the Innery River, or any river. And also 18th century armies, and I guess armies of all time, have marched on their stomachs, and this was a place that controlled the food in the area. Local farmers brought their crops here to grind them. Loyalists set up a camp here. There were about 300 local loyalists. They created a supply depot. They commanded access to the river crossing, and they also set up a shelter for wounded British and Royalist troops. There were wounded British soldiers being treated here as soon as about 3 weeks in advance of the battle. So the Loyalists had done their job really well. So a Patriot militia, a Whig militia as it would have been called back then, found out very soon that this place had turned into a Loyalist outpost and planned an attack. There were about 200 of them operating in the vicinity of the Broad River, about 40 miles north of here, and from Georgia, South Carolina, and what would now be eastern Tennessee. The ones from eastern Tennessee would be called Over Mountain Men. And so they were on horseback. They rode overnight 40 miles in order to carry out a surprise attack. In the morning, they were actually surprised themselves to find out that the depot here had been reinforced by provincial troops. So provincial troops were loyalists, but they were actually British armed, British outfitted, British trained. They wore the iconic red coats, and for all intents and purposes, they were regular soldiers. So Yeah, that also meant that there were about 500 loyalists and 200 Whigs. So yeah, the Whigs had to figure out pretty quickly what to do. Unfortunately, a Tory scout spotted them, and so they lost the element of surprise as well. So there was no overall commander of the Whig forces. Each group of men had elected a colonel from among their own number. They acted quickly. They positioned their men along the top of a ridge at the edge of a clearing, and each man was behind a tree and could fire behind a tree. So strong defensive position, which is always a good thing when you're outnumbered. However, they still had to kind of draw the loyalists into their trap. And the way they did that was a volunteer whose name was Shadrach Inman. He was a captain of the Georgia militia, and he volunteered with 20 other men to go down to the ford and provoke the loyalists into marching up the hill and attacking them in their, in their strong defensive position. So they did that. They rode down on horseback. Yeah, sorry about that. I had the sun in my eyes, and I still kind of do. But right behind me, you can see right where the ford would have been. So that's we're currently on what would have been the British side of the river, where the British loyalist camp was. In Shadrach Inman and his men would have been on the other side of that ford, firing across and provoking the loyalists, which they were successful in doing. But unfortunately, Shadrach Inman lost his life in the process. So the Whigs were at the top of the clearing, hidden behind trees. The Tories were at the bottom. Upon sighting the enemy, the loyalists formed up and began to march towards the top of the clearing at a pace of about 70 steps per minute, which is just a little bit slower than you would walk if you were just kind of walking down the sidewalk. When they did release their first volley, the loyalists fired too soon, and it didn't have much effect on the Whigs. The first Whig volley was devastating because they waited until the loyalists were pretty close to fire. As soon as the Whigs fired, the loyalists fixed bayonets and began to charge up the hill. And it looked like they were actually going to clear off the Whigs, as they'd done many times before at the point of bayonet. However, the Whigs were reinforced. The men that had been held in reserve, the over mountain men, were sent in now to kind of turn things back around. I think they were on horseback, and they charged into the loyalist line, and it would appear that there was a stalemate for a few minutes with both sides firing volleys until the Whigs finally unleashed a volley which killed about 5 of the 7 loyalist officers, at which point the loyalists began to retreat in disarray, which I guess is understandable at that point. So unsurprisingly, when the loyalists retreated, the patriots pursued them and caught up to them right about at the river crossing. And there, some very brutal hand-to-hand combat ensued. They would have been fighting with bayonets and sabers and knives and tomahawks. It would have been just absolutely brutal. And it would appear that about 70 loyalists were killed and close to 100 wounded. while the Whigs suffered only about a dozen men killed and wounded. So definitely a black eye for British prestige in the region. I think that the Whigs would have pursued them further if they hadn't found out that there was a larger regiment of provincials under the command of Patrick Ferguson, very nearby and headed towards Musgrove Mill. So they realized they had to get out of there quick, and that's what they did. So ironically, both sides actually retreated, but I think it's fair to call it a Whig victory, since they did, after all, drive the Loyalists off the field, and they killed a lot more of the Loyalists than the Loyalists killed of them. It was also a big morale boost, I would say, for the cause of American independence, and many of the men who fought there would go on to fight at the Battle of Kings Mountain about a month later against the aforementioned Patrick Ferguson, who deserves an entire video just for him. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah, so a pretty unqualified victory. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed the video today. You can probably tell that I think that this battle is just a gem of Revolutionary War history, and the best part about it is you can come by and check it out yourself. It's a beautiful hike around here, so come by and take a look. If you like the video, give it a like. That helped me out. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and check out my t-shirt website, Expedition Tees. The link's in the description below. So yeah, that's all for today. Until next time, take care.